In the early days of television news, Edward R. Murrow worried about the future of journalism.
This is an old team trying to learn a new trade.
Later, Walter Cronkite became the most trusted man in America.
And that's the way it is.
Today, there is tension between the White House and the media. We have concerns of so-called fake news and declining faith in news sources. In Part 1 of this report, we examine a specific case study involving alleged police brutality against minorities and the ensuing news coverage. Then, in Part 2, we look at the larger issue of audience confidence in the media, in television, truth, and trust.
Minnesota traffic stop turns deadly as a police officer opens fire on a black driver.
It feels like every week, sometimes every day, another person, often black and unarmed, has died at the hands of police.
After a police officer was charged with first-degree murder, accused of shooting and killing a black teen and continuing to fire even after the teenager fell to the ground.
The headlines make it seem as if the country is experiencing an unprecedented wave of police violence. But, as CNN first reported, experts say that isn't the case. We're just seeing more mainstream media coverage, and for a variety of reasons.
The National Guard has taken control of Ferguson, Missouri.
Former CNN Washington correspondent Charles Bierbauer always hopes for fair media coverage, but sees new technology and social media as a challenge for today's journalists.
Indeed, the ability of every citizen to broadcast on their own, as we saw happen in one of the shooting incidents, imposes a greater responsibility on the media to ensure that they've got the story right.
Good evening. Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee.
Bierbauer, who worked for ABC and later CNN for over 20 years, says it is difficult to compare today's media coverage to that of the civil rights movement because in the 1960s we only had traditional media outlets.
Today you got 1,000 different perspectives, some of which may be legitimate, some of which may be first person, and many of which are just retweets.
Since 2002, Bierbauer has been Dean of the College of Mass Communication and Information Studies at the University of South Carolina. Bierbauer shares how a student example can apply to all who consume news.
Indeed, I tell my students if they're only getting their news from one place, they're doing themselves a disservice to start with, and certainly not doing a service in gathering the story. That people have to respect that much of what we see comes from a biased perspective.
Bierbauer adds, if you factor in bias, you can extract useful information.
If you take things on face value, then the bias is going to run rampant over you. So I think the challenge for journalists and for audiences, it's as much on their side, is to recognize how complex the situation is now and how much the responsibility is to sift and sort and determine what are really reliable sources and what are the equivalent of your crazy uncle in the attic.
Remembering the 9 people that were shot dead inside that church.
University of South Carolina's Dr. Kenneth Campbell's research provides an analysis of first-day coverage of the Emanuel 9 church shooting in Charleston and what it might say about journalistic practice. In his research, Campbell wanted to see if the presence of race in a story involving a horrific shooting by a white male at an African-American church had some effect on how the story was treated.
Because of the racial history of the region, the newspapers that we looked at were really sensitive in how they handled this story, and they were concerned about telling the story to the public and particularly to the local community in a way that helped move the community forward, rather than just focusing on the nature of the crime.
Days after the killings here, people are still marching up with flowers in their hands and grief on their faces.
Campbell says media may be evolving over time to not just reporting what happened, but showing compassion and advancing the story.
Media were certainly, in this instance, serving a positive role in the community. And when I say media, I'm talking, of course, specifically about the newspapers that we examined.
Tuscaloosa police are investigating a shooting involving 2 of its officers.
Another research project compares the effects of news media coverage on African American, Caucasian, and Hispanic attitudes toward police. Dr. Will Canale, an associate professor at the University of Central Florida, is studying how news might affect people in different ways in terms of their attitudes or confidence in police, with initial results showing a difference in attitudes across ethnicities.
Caucasians were more favorable toward police and law enforcement. African Americans were least favorable toward police and law enforcement. Hispanics were right in the middle, and where there was a statistical difference was between the Caucasians and Hispanics and African Americans. Theirs was different, but not statistically different.
Canale adds there is a body of research having to do with the portrayal of minorities in the media.
The way in which those portrayals affect people's perceptions, particularly of policies. And so some of the earlier research was looking at the impact of the images used, photographs used in news stories, whether it's online or in a paper, that go along with it, and the way in which people respond to the ethnicities of the people who are presented in those photos.
Canale's research in progress found, in one example, a case of the Orlando Sentinel doing a story on the Second Harvest Food Bank. He says the thing that stood out in this involved the images of black children.
Research and theory suggests that the frequency of the presentations and the ethnicities that are included in these photographs, or whatever it might be, it could be video clips in a story, affect people's perceptions of whatever that topic is.
Tonight, this newly released dashcam video shows the chilling moments Chicago police officer Jason Van Dyke unloads his gun on 17-year-old Laquan McDonald. McDonald died on his way to the hospital.
It is graphic, it is violent, it is chilling.
The new technology has enabled coverage of this very substantive issue to change dramatically.
Former news director for WSMV-TV in Nashville, Alan Griggs, says it was not too long ago when there was no video of these events, resulting in he said, she said accusations. Griggs says that all changed with camera phones and body cameras for police.
Not every police officer has one, but many do nowadays, and so that video is released quite often. And so you have an entirely different and changing complexion of news coverage about these events.
Witnesses describe the arrest as brutal. His family tells me Freddie Gray now has spinal injuries, but police say when they saw the video, there was no use of excessive force.
Griggs, now the chair of the Communication and Journalism Department at Lipscomb University, will not go as far as saying all of it is good, but will admit coverage is much more transparent today than it ever has been.
It creates a new challenge for journalists in the sense that we should show it, but we do not want to be inflammatory about it. And I think too many times in this business, television journalists gauge the importance of a story by the strength of the video that they have.
From MSNBC came coverage of a debate about police releasing the dash cam and body cam video of a shooting.
Charlotte police have decided not to release those videos. We warn you, this video, which again was given to us by the Scott family, is disturbing. You're going to hear the deadly gunshots, but you will not see anyone get shot.
Don't shoot him! Don't shoot him!
Griggs adds, even when a story is considered weak, if the video is compelling, then you're going to see the video used.
So there is a definite advantage to the technology bringing along coverage of this issue, but at the same time, it's incumbent upon journalists to really make sure that the technology doesn't get so far ahead of them that it biases the news coverage. And I think that's a real possibility.
The city of Cleveland will pay $6 million to the family of Tamir Rice, the 12-year-old African-American boy who was fatally shot by a white rookie police officer.
Griggs hopes that today's journalists weigh the substance of the story before they think about the impact of the technology, because he cautions it's real simple to put that in reverse. For example, he says body camera use is so new that he is not sure if most newsrooms have a policy on the use of that video.
We have remarkable video today of those who have been arrested being put in chokeholds or being shot even or being chased. And while that video really adds validity to the court case and to the event itself, I'm just concerned that too many journalists base the importance of the story on the power of the video. That's something that can't be overlooked, but I think the substance of the story itself should outweigh that.
it is a very tense situation, probably the most tense since Alton Sterling was shot and killed on Tuesday. This is a live look in front of Baton Rouge Police Headquarters. Airline Highway by Baton Rouge Headquarters has been shut down for probably 3 hours. It has been protesters on one side, police on the other.
Griggs warns with coverage like this, if journalists are not careful, it's going to underline the belief the media are more inflammatory than anything else.
I think a word of strong caution is in order, that we be responsible about what video we use, how we show it, and how many times it's used. Not letting that argument, the strength of the video, overcome all of these other questions that we need to put into badly needed perspective.
Griggs says journalists should ask themselves whether they are being fair to every person impacted by the news report.
How far should we go in using that video? And should any of it be edited out? I'm sure that it should be in most cases, but it is such a powerful tool now that I'm afraid it would be easy for us to let it get out of hand.
Talk show host Trevor Noah adds humor to commentary in his addressing a police shooting of a minority in Tulsa.
Look, don't get me wrong, it looks cut and dry to me, but the truth is I wasn't there. None of us were there. None of us were there. We're never there in those situations. We don't know what happened before the video. We don't know what the cop expected when they got there. We don't know if the guy was on drugs or not on drugs. What we do know is this. It seems extremely easy to get shot by police in America, which is not right.
Generations have received news of the most important events from the media. It is reporters who have given us our first draft of history.
This just in, you are looking at obviously a very disturbing live shot there. That is the World Trade Center, and we have unconfirmed reports this morning that a plane has crashed into one of the towers.
For many, trust in the media was at an all-time high from the era of World War II, with coverage provided by CBS's Edward R. Murrow, who was also there for the early days of television.
We're impressed with the importance of this medium. We shall hope to learn to use it and not to abuse it.
That trust continued with news anchors such as Walter Cronkite, who was considered by many the most trusted man in America. Cronkite anchored the CBS Evening News from 1962 to 1981 and led us through the civil rights movement, assassinations, Watergate, space travel, and the war in Vietnam.
The enemy struck across the length and breadth of South Vietnam.
However, a recent Gallup poll shows Americans' belief that television, newspapers, radio, and new media report the news fully, accurately, and fairly is now at an all-time low of 40%.
Foreign automakers suffered steep double-digit losses. Overseas, the city of Rome narrowly escaped disaster. How soon will American troops be out of Iraq?
The Gallup survey shows up until 2003, about half of Americans polled trusted what the media was telling them. That trust has slowly eroded since. So what has changed since the eras of Cronkite and Murrow? According to veteran anchor for WSMV television in Nashville, Demetria Kaladimos, so many outlets today provide news, but she says some lack credibility.
The more opinions that are out there, the less trust there is in just a few of those. We've got to be careful and make sure that we're sticking with ones that are giving us accurate information.
And that's the way it is.
For many, there remains nostalgia for the Cronkite era of media coverage. The Poynter Institute for Media Studies Vice President of Academic Programs, Kelly McBride, says what has changed today is we have so many voices. She says we trusted Cronkite because we did not have many other options.
He was a white guy on television telling us that we should believe him, and we didn't have any alternatives. I suspect that if you were to interview people back in the day, there were a lot of people who didn't trust Cronkite, but they didn't have anything else available to them.
With so many options today, Lipscomb University Associate Professor of Journalism Dr. Jimmy McCollum says viewers, readers, and listeners tune into the sources in which they believe.
I think it's a vicious cycle. Those journalists, those media representatives will tend to spout out the things that they want to hear. I thought it was interesting that somebody has said that even when journalists put out the truth these days, sometimes it's not being believed. So I think that's a troubling sign that journalists have these days.
The Poynter Institute's Kelly McBride on only hearing like-minded voices.
I'm much more likely to trust people who look like me and act like me and sound like me. And that's true for everybody. But the great thing is we have this plurality of voices. So I can find those voices in lots and lots of different places.
Here are the headlines for this Sunday morning, the 16th.
Trust is a relationship, in this case between the media and its audience, according to the news director for WREG-TV in Memphis, Bruce Moore.
I'm troubled when anybody says that they don't trust us. All I can do is stand on our newsroom, on our organization, and work hard to be accurate and fair every single day. And if we make a mistake, to admit it.
The Poynter Institute's Kelly McBride adds, in many cases of news coverage, in her words, the audience has been tricked so many times they know information is fallible.
I don't think people are ever going to trust the media again. I think that those days are gone. I think that they're going to learn to trust certain brands or certain sources because those sources are generally reliable. And that's what we're going to have to strive for. And so it's going to be more about that relationship between the consumer and the information provider, not so much the media in general.
Memphis television news director Bruce Moore has difficulty diagnosing the problem of declining trust in the media. When Moore looks around the country at those delivering the news, he sees strong reporting and ethics, but he sees a few cases where some don't make the right decisions.
However, I think when you look at the landscape of what is reported and what is written every day, I think it's strong. And I think the American public is a well-informed public if they choose to be well-informed.
Another difference in today's media coverage involves the increase of citizen journalism. Moore's Nashville television counterpart, anchor Demetria Kaladimos, offers a comparison of professional versus citizen journalists. She says citizens are great observers, have great ideas, and she welcomes citizen journalists, but with caution.
But I do think that journalism needs to be a profession and a craft. And even the citizen with a microphone or with a camera has some responsibility to the truth. And I would hope that they take that part of their title, if it's citizen journalist, they take the journalist part seriously and put out information that they know to be true, to the best of their investigation and knowledge.
Dr. Jimmy McCollum teaches aspiring reporters at Lipscomb University and offers his analysis of professional versus citizen journalist.
I think it's even tougher for audiences to distinguish between someone who has spent hours and maybe days or weeks working on a story and someone who has just done sit in front of the computer reporting. So I think that's a real challenge.
In traditional journalism, reporters deliver the facts and let the audience decide what their opinion is of that information. However, some correspondents today offer opinion, according to WSMV anchor Demetria Kaladimos.
I think there definitely is bias out there, and again, it's up to the consumer to decide who they're reading, who they trust, and who they go to for accurate information.
With more sources for news and the reality of some only tuning into opinions that match theirs, will this actually create a less informed society? News director Bruce Moore says it is up to every person to become informed.
It's hard to, from a family standpoint, make people learn about daily events and issues. All we can do is gather the news and report the news, and hopefully people will take it upon themselves to learn about it in whatever way they want to.
Research shows fewer read the newspaper or watch a TV newscast. Lipscomb journalism professor Jimmy McCollum says students these days tend to get news from comedy programs.
Ladies and gentlemen, here's tonight's top 10 list. Let's start this.
Jon Stewart, Saturday Night Live, and there may not be that sense of let's go to the mainstream media, let's go to the newspaper, let's look at 2 or 3 different magazines for this story, but they'll watch Comedy Central on their phone or on TV, and that will suffice for their news, and that's the challenge.
McCollum adds it is important for today's journalists and those studying journalism in college to learn to cover all sides to a story.
Keep on teaching those basics that we have tried for years, reporting and objectivity and fairness. The fact that newsrooms are getting smaller should not be an excuse for doing a sloppy job.
Some in society trust citizen journalists more than professional reporters. In order to combat this, award-winning journalist and retired editorial page editor for the Tennessean, Dwight Lewis, says media organizations have to reach out to their community and offer not only the news they want, but the news consumers need. Lewis says you cannot call yourself a good media organization if you just cover one area.
You have to cover it all. And if you don't cover it all, people are going to look elsewhere for those citizen journalists to give them what they need.
Trust in the media is enhanced by the consumer when they believe a reporter understands your lived experience, according to the Poynter Institute's Kelly McBride.
And if you never see them express your lived experience, you're probably not going to believe that they're trustworthy because they don't know anything about you. So how could they possibly be trustworthy around the issues that you want them to be trustworthy around? That's why diversity is really important and getting diverse voices into a variety of platforms.
The Tennessean's Dwight Lewis says reporters must not forget there is a real world out there.
I can't just go to work from home, stay in the office, and then go back home. That I still have to get out and see people and talk to people and listen to people. And I think when you do that, you can build trust.
With all of the negativity surrounding journalism, Nashville TV anchor Demetria Kalodimos remains positive.
I'm still excited about the profession. I think there's always going to be a need for a messenger, and there's always going to be curious and inquisitive people who want to know what's going on in the world. Journalism's alive. We just got to make sure that everyone values it as much as those of us who practice it.
The Poynter Institute's Kelly McBride hopes we never get to the place where the public loses all trust in the media.
So if nobody trusts anything, democracy doesn't work. We're in a precarious place. I wouldn't say it's a bad place. I think we have choices to make about how we as consumers consume information and how we as news producers produce information.
To regain public trust, many journalists may wish to remember the basic principles of journalism: to give a voice to the voiceless, to hold the powerful accountable, and to realize whether we get our news from traditional media, computer, tablet, or phone. This admonition from Edward R. Murrow still applies.
This instrument can teach, it can illuminate, yes, and even it can inspire. But it can do so only to the extent that humans are determined to use it to those ends. Otherwise, it's nothing but wires and lights in a box.
I'm Terry Likes. You're listening to Tennessee Matters on the Tennessee Radio Network.